Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Cedric Tillman, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 14 wide receiver rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm covering all topics related to the wide receiver position, beginning with matchups, talking about which defenses are allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers so that we can identify the most advantageous matchups going into Week 14. After which, I'll transition into talking about my top 40 wide receiver rankings. If you guys are looking for my thoughts on a specific wide receiver, travel down to the description of the video like we have in every single video. There are timestamps available down there. While you're down there, if you haven't yet already, be sure to subscribe because we're of course producing daily content, but not only that, also live streaming every single day. Later tonight, starting at 7 p.m. PST, if you have any questions regarding starter sit questions, potentially waiver wire pickups for the fantasy football playoffs, etc., I'm more than happy to help, so be sure to swing on by. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin by talking about matchups at the wide receiver position based on statistics allowed between week 6 through 13 by each individual defense. Obviously, a team like the Houston Texans, who are the most advantageous matchup at the wide receiver position, will not be able to be taken advantage of because, unfortunately, they are on a bye week. But the Texans, Saints, Browns, Falcons, Vikings, Broncos, Chargers, etc. are the most advantageous matchups at the wide receiver position based on receiving statistics allowed, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns in a half PPR scoring format. So as we progress throughout today's video and we talk about these players on an individual basis, I will reintroduce the conversation of matchups at the wide receiver position in order to give ourselves a little bit more clarity as to why we are starting one player over the other based on the defenses they take on. Now, some of the more disadvantageous matchups, which may have us kind of leaning away from some wide receivers, are the Philadelphia Eagles, Packers, 49ers, Commanders, Panthers, Colts, etc. Of course, some of those teams on bye, but as of late, the Philadelphia Eagles have shut down opposing wide receivers. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp still were able to find themselves a semblance of success. So hopefully someone like Adam Thielen is certainly going to be capable of finding himself not only a healthy target opportunity, but still be successful within the overall matchup. Either way, I just wanted to go ahead and present these statistics at a surface level. We'll go ahead and we'll delve deeper into the overall conversation as we continue. Before I get into talking about my top 40 wide receiver rankings, just want to remind you guys, if you guys want my all-encompassing rankings every Sunday morning for the remainder of the season, be sure to travel down to the description of the video and either check out the Patreon or go ahead and sign up via Underdog. At this current moment in time, if you use code Andrew, make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only will you be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, but also go ahead and potentially tail the entries that we're going to make over the course of this week and get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, includes flex in order to help you every single Sunday. So for those of you who are interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. If in fact you are not eligible based on your current location, or if you've used my code or somebody else's code in the past, like I mentioned earlier, you can always check out the Patreon link down in the description. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin with the wide receiver conversation at a top 40 capacity, beginning with the best wide receiver in fantasy football, someone who has scored 13 receiving touchdowns in the last 10 games. He has scored a singular touchdown in 5 of the last 6. I mean, again, he has been a dominant force for fantasy purposes and is not slowing down. The fact that the Cincinnati Bengals did not give him a contract prior to the season, I am sure they are crying about it. The Bengals organization is going to have to pay him somewhere between $36 to $40 million a year. Again, depending on how well he continues to play and based on how much Justin Jefferson is making on a per year basis, it's ridiculous. Either way, going into this week, taking on the Dallas Cowboys, they are the 10th best matchup at the position, allowing 28.31 fantasy points per game based on receiving statistics. We've seen wide receivers like Nabers, McLaurin, AJ Brown all find success against this matchup as of late. I'd expect Ja'Marr Chase to continue to do such this week. Moving on to our number 2, we have Amon-Ra St. Now, he takes on the Green Bay Packers on Thursday night. Again, it's relatively a short week, but they did play last Thursday, so they have a full week of rest ahead of them. Going into the matchup, again, we look back to the previous matchup between these two teams in a rain game in Green Bay. We did see Amon-Ra still succeed with 7 targets, 7 catches, 56 in a touchdown, 15.1 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Now that we're going to be in a controlled weather environment indoors in Detroit, I would anticipate that Amon-Ra St. would have the advantage in this circumstance. We've already confirmed that Jair Alexander, the number 1 cornerback of the Green Bay Packers, is not going to be active going into this game. It only continues to build upon the advantages that Amon-Ra St. has within the matchup. Moving on to our number 3, we have Justin Jefferson, who, yes, hasn't scored a touchdown in the last 6 games, and I honestly do believe he's due because, Sam Darnold continues to play well, but guys like Aaron Jones, backup tight ends, continue to score within the red zone. Jordan Addison, of course, has scored a touchdown in 3 of the last 5 games. Justin Jefferson is due. Again, his target opportunity finally jumped back into the normal conversation like it did last week, getting himself 7 catches for 99 with those opportunities, but now has an opportunity of taking on a top 5 matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons allowing over 31 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. These are the recent performances from wide receivers. The Denver Broncos receiving core, 19 catches, 260 and 3 touchdowns. MVS 3 for 109 and 2 touchdowns. Ladd McConkey dominated with 9 catches for 117. I'd expect Justin Jefferson to hopefully find the end zone, but even if he doesn't, the yardage and receptions will make do in the week. Number 4, we have Puka Nacua. Look, the fact of the matter is Puka Nacua, what he has proven when he has been healthy this season, he is scoring anywhere between 14 to 22 fantasy points. That is his range. At a base minimum, he's going to put up 14 points. At the overall upside of his performance, we're going to get a 22 to 25 point game. Nonetheless, taking on the Buffalo Bills isn't an easy matchup to say the least, especially considering how well their secondary has played over the course of the season. But what does give us a little bit of confidence is the fact that this is going to be a guaranteed negative game script. If the Rams come out lackluster like they did last week in the first half, of course, the Bills will take an early lead. And when they do so, Puka Nacua will be benefiting from a high volume of opportunities in the second half of this game. A negative game script throughout the entirety of it is expected, which will continue to increase the overall target share for Puka this week. Moving on to our number 5. The thumbnail of today's episode, we have T. Higgins. Yes, we have 2 Cincinnati Bengals within the top 5, and it's not by accident. T. Higgins, when he has been healthy this season, has been incredible. In the last 5 games he has played, he has put up 14 plus fantasy points in every single one of those games and has scored 5 touchdowns in the last 5 games. He's going back to his normal production of out-targeting Ja'Marr Chase. This is another consecutive week in which he has done so. And like Ja'Marr Chase, they both have an opportunity of taking on a top 10 matchup. The Dallas Cowboys allowing over 28 fantasy points per game. Like I mentioned earlier, Nabers, McLaurin, A.J. Brown, they've all found success. I would expect T. Higgins to follow suit within this overall situation. Moving on to the A tier, we have Mike Evans as our number 6. Look, Mike Evans finally getting back to his normal state of production. After missing more than a month with the hamstring injury, week 12 was kind of his readjustment period. But now that we were in week 13, 12 targets, 8 catches, 118, a goal line touchdown, continuing to get opportunities outside of the occasional Sterling Shepard or maybe the occasional Cade Otton. It is purely the Mike Evans show within this offense in the passing game. And considering they're taking on the Las Vegas Raiders, there's a possibility in which the passing game does not exist because they're running the ball the entire time. But we're going to hope this is going to be a competitive matchup and Las Vegas can at least keep up with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to the extent to where Mike Evans can be relevant. The Raiders are allowing nearly 24 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. The only wide receiver benefiting from fantasy points on this offense is Evans. Again, we have seen guys like D-Hop go for 90 receiving yards, Sutton 97 and 2 touchdowns, Hill 61 and a touchdown. I'd expect Mike Evans to continue to dominate. Number 7, we have A.J. Brown. Look, A.J. Brown is a guaranteed 5 receptions. He is specifically at 5 receptions. I've taken that number going higher than 4.5 on Underdog. I would say each of the last 5 weeks, and it's benefited greatly, except for the 1 week in which he got injured and left against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Otherwise, every single game minimum this season, 5+ receptions. Make sure you check that out via Underdog. Either way, going into this week, we're just hoping for a touchdown because we know the receptions and the yardage is going to be there. If he scores a touchdown, even better. Taking on the Carolina Panthers obviously is an advantageous matchup for the running game, so Saquon may run away with this game as a whole. But considering we may be in a situation that Dallas Goedert may miss this game due to injury, it may increase the overall potential for opportunity for A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. This week, taking on the Carolina Panthers, again, J.C. Horn will be the primary matchup, but we have seen wide receivers such as, of course, Mike Evans, 8 for 118 and a touchdown. D-Hop, 35 and a touchdown. Sutton for 100 yards. McLaurin, 98 receiving yards. I'd assume A.J. Brown is going to step up to the task on hand. Moving on to our number 8, we have Tyreek Hill, who found himself with a lucky receiving touchdown last week. We'll take it. We're not going to complain about 17 fantasy points in any realm of possibility. Now, this week they take on the New York Jets, who, of course, Tyreek Hill has found himself a lot of success with last season. In the matchup against the New York Jets, in which he took them on, 12 targets, 9 catches, 102 and a touchdown for 20.9 fantasy points and a half PPR. He has scored a single touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games, and as long as the target opportunity continues to be healthy in the direction of Tyreek Hill, we know that guys like Devon Achane, Jonnu Smith, and Jaylen Waddle are going to get theirs, but Tyreek Hill, of course, should still be the number 1 of this offense. Hopefully the opportunities are going in his direction, especially considering Sauce Gardner is dealing with a hamstring injury. We have seen wide receivers such as Josh Downs, 5 for 84 and a touchdown. Marvin Harrison, 54 and a touchdown. Dell for 126. Pickens for 111 and a touchdown against his defense as of late. Hopefully Tyreek Hill is going to continue that streak of success. Number 9. We have Drake London, who's coming off of a game in which he set a not only season high, but career high of 16 targets. Kirk Cousins, despite the fact that he was throwing interception after interception, continued to look in the direction of his number 1 receiving option, Drake London. And hopefully that target opportunity is only going to continue to persist going into this week's matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. Yes, this is a revenge game for Kirk Cousins. Over the course of this season, we have seen players find a lot of success within the revenge games, such as, Jerry Jeudy recently, DJ Moore, Saquon Barkley, a lot of players against their former teams popping off. So hopefully Kirk Cousins can step up to the task on hand and elevate the level of Drake London. Of course, taking on the Minnesota Vikings is not a difficult matchup at the wide receiver position. They're the 5th best, allowing over 30 fantasy points per game. We have seen Marvin Harrison last week, 60 and a touchdown. DJ Moore, 106 and a touchdown. Keenan Allen in the same game, 86 and a touchdown. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine over 100 yards and a touchdown. So Drake London poised for another fantastic performance here with opportunity. Moving on to our number 10, close out the A tier. We have George Pickens, who continues to ball out. I mean, again, since we have seen Russell Wilson take the starting quarterback job, excluding the snow game in which they took on the Cleveland Browns, he's been averaging 7.8 targets, 5 receptions, 88 yards, and 0.6 receiving touchdowns. Again, a fantastic volume of opportunity and continuing to deliver, averaging 14.96 half PPR fantasy points per game. In each of the last 5 games he has played with, Russell Wilson, excluding the snow game, has got himself 74 or more receiving yards, continues to dominate, now has an opportunity of getting revenge against the Cleveland Browns, who they lost to just a couple weeks back in that snow game. Again, the Browns are allowing 31.66 fantasy points per game. We have seen many of wide receivers dominate. Sutton went for 102 the other day. Mims 105 in a touchdown. MVS 87 in a touchdown. Quentin Johnston 118 in a touchdown. George Pickens is up next to dominate. Number 11. We have Cooper Kupp. Now, I understand that Cooper Kupp is coming off of the worst game of his season thus far. Obviously, a lack of opportunity with only 6 targets. And, of course, DeMarcus Robinson scoring a touchdown rather than him. But going into this week, I do anticipate Cooper Kupp to bounce back in a negative game script in which, of course, the Buffalo Bills are probably mounting an early lead in this game and consistently scoring. It is going to force Matthew Stafford and this offensive attack to continue to throw the ball. Obviously, looking in the direction of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp in order to solve that. Obviously, this most recent performance for Matthew Stafford, not the greatest. He only targeted Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp a total of 14 times as a duo, which typically we're expecting 14 targets to one of these receivers, which hopefully is going to be the case this week. So I'm not too worried about him. Even within the matchup against the Buffalo Bills, I still anticipate Cooper Kupp to be highly involved and find a lot of success within the upcoming matchup. Moving on to our number 12, a wide receiver that continues to dominate over the course of the last 3 games, weeks 11 through 13, averaging 9 targets, 7 receptions, 108 receiving yards, and 14.27 fantasy points per game within this offense. He has yet to score a touchdown in each of the last 3 games and is averaging 14 plus fantasy points and a half PPR. That just gives you an understanding as to how great Ladd McConkey has been within this offense as the clear and away number 1. Now, back in week 4 against the Kansas City Chiefs, who he has a privilege of taking on this week, in that matchup, 7 targets, 5 catches, 67 in a touchdown, 15.2 fantasy points, which I am hoping he's going to be able to accomplish this week against this defense, considering how badly the Chiefs defense and secondary has played as of late. They're the 12th best matchup. They have fallen off the cliff per se. Again, giving up over 28 fantasy points per game as a secondary, whether it is out wide or within the slot position, the secondary has struggled. And quite frankly, Ladd McConkey, he's running around this entire formation, finding success everywhere. Thus far this season, he has found 63+% of his overall targets, receptions, and receiving yards, and 100% of his receiving touchdowns from the slot position. So that's probably where he'll be dominating within the upcoming matchup this week. All right, moving on to our number 13. We cannot ignore him any longer. Jerry Jeudy continues to ball out, coming off of a revenge game that was absolutely legendary against a secondary that should have shut him down, considering how great they have played. They could not stop him. They could not stop Jameis Winston. 9 receptions, 235 and a touchdown. The second most receiving yards by a receiver this season, only behind Jamar Chase's 265. Obviously, 2 of the last 3 games have been incredible for Jerry Jeudy, over 142 receiving yards and a touchdown minimum in 2 of the last 3 games. The only game in which he wasn't able to accomplish this was the snow game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Even in that game within the snow, 85 receiving yards and 6 catches in week 12. My anticipation taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers is that he'll find immediate success, very similar to T. Higgins and of course Jamar Chase last week as the number 1 receiving option of Jameis Winston. He should find himself in abundance of success. He's an auto star going forward. Number 14, we have Jayden Reed. Look, the fact of the matter is, Jayden Reed, he's going to have himself inconsistencies. Last week, 3 catches, but 2 receiving touchdowns. So we'll take it. We're not going to complain, but the overall opportunity share, not a great number, especially considering they were up 24-0 at halftime. There wasn't really a necessity for the Green Bay Packers to continue to pour it on. Rather, they were just trying to kill the clock and get out of that game in a cold weather situation. But this week, they take on the Detroit Lions on Thursday night. Earlier this season in week 9 against the Detroit Lions, it was one of the best games that Reed has had all season long. 5 catches for 113, 13.8 fantasy points. If we're going to be in a situation in which we'll be able to expose that matchup, considering the weather situation is going to be contained indoors in Detroit. They're the 9th best matchup at the position. They've most recently allowed, slot receiving options such as Keenan Allen, 5 for 73 and 2 touchdowns. DJ Moore dominated in that game. Michael Pittman Jr., BTJ, all these wide receivers finding success. Hopefully, Jayden Reed is the next man up, especially considering Romeo Doubs already confirmed out this week. Moving on to our number 15, speaking of DJ Moore, he's coming off of a week in which he had a season high of 16 targets. Now, obviously, that was able to occur mainly because of the fact that the Chicago Bears could not do anything in the first half and had to throw for the entirety of the second half. So looking in the direction of his number 1 wide receiver, Caleb Williams continued to target DJ Moore and found himself a lot of success. 8 catches, 97 and a touchdown. Obviously, we would like some of those balls back in terms of the overall opportunity sent in his direction. Not the highest quality, but as they continue to build this rapport, again, we're talking about DJ Moore, who in the last 2 games had 7 receptions, 97 yards, and a touchdown minimum, putting up the last 2 weeks of performances 19.7 and 23.4 fantasy points. So I'm not complaining. Taking on the San Francisco 49ers is a little bit more difficult of a matchup in comparison to Minnesota and or the Detroit Lions as of late, but a negative game script guaranteed with a fired head coach, I'm expecting that's enough of a motivation for DJ Moore to ball out once again this week. Number 17, we have CeeDee Lamb, who is coming off a week in which he unfortunately only played 67% of the offensive snaps, primarily because he did get injured in the third quarter, had to leave that game. He could have potentially even returned, but considering the lead that they had against the Giants at the time, there wasn't really a necessity to bring him back into the game. But when he has been healthy as of late with Cooper Rush, his target counts have looked like 10, 12, and 12. So as long as we expect him to be healthy, gets a full practice designation by the end of this week, by Friday, taking on the Cincinnati Bengals, which is the 11th best matchup at the position, it should be a fantastic week for CeeDee Lamb. Now, I don't expect anything other than receptions and receiving yards, and that's why I have him at number 16. If he is able to find himself touchdown upside, easily a top 12 overall option within the week. But again, this offense hasn't functioned at that high of a capacity. Therefore, we're just going to go ahead and put him at number 16 based on receptions and receiving yards. In a full PPR would be higher, but considering this is half PPR rankings, meaning everyone in the middle, 16 safe. Moving on to our number 17, we have Malik Nabers. Now, I don't know who's going to be playing quarterback, but obviously Drew Lock, in his overall kind of competitiveness, really did make it a seamless transition to get the ball in the direction of Malik Nabers consistently. 13 targets, 8 catches, 69 yards last week. Now has an opportunity of taking on the Saints, the second best matchup at the position. Again, this secondary has struggled all season long. Nacua coming off of a game of 56 and a touchdown. Jeudy 142 and a touchdown. London with 97. In the same game, Mooney for 96. I would anticipate Malik Nabers, the receptions, the yardage is going to be there. If he finds himself in the end zone, very similar to CeeDee Lamb, he's a top 12 option by the end of the week. Moving on to our number 18, we have Jauan Jennings. Again, going against the Chicago Bears is not an easy matchup. We know that Jalen Johnson has played incredibly well thus far this season, but we have seen wide receivers as of late find themselves a healthy volume of success against this defense. McLaurin went for 125, Christian Watson for 150, and Jordan Addison for 162 and a touchdown. Therefore, there's always a possibility for Jauan Jennings on the outside to find himself success if given the opportunity. Again, thus far this season, in the 3 games in which he has played 80+% of the snaps, in which we exclude the overall weather game last week, we have seen Jauan Jennings get 12, 11, and 11 targets with Brock Purdy. Again, that's a 31% target rate based on the routes that he has ran over the course of the season. Again, if Brock Purdy's healthy, taking on the Chicago Bears, it should be an easy overall matchup for him to find success. Moving on to our number 19, we have Davante Adams. Look, in the last 4 games, he's averaging 10.8 targets, 6.0 receptions, 65 yards, and a half a touchdown per game for 12.5 fantasy points per game. The opportunity share continues to be there. Double-digit targets in 3 of the last 4 games. So as long as the opportunity share is there within this offense, where Aaron Rodgers is throwing 2 touchdowns per game on a typical basis, I'm going to anticipate and potentially expect Davante Adams to get himself the opportunity share, probably catch 5 to 6 passes, and find himself in the end zone. And if he's capable of doing so, the number 19 spot as a base minimum is a very strong position within the rankings. Again, considering his overall contribution of opportunity in comparison to Garrett Wilson as late, and the overall upside between their 2 performances, Davante Adams has clear and away been the number 1 option for fantasy purposes within the Jets offense. Number 20, we have Jaxon Smith-Njigba taking on the Arizona Cardinals, who he most recently took on back in week 12. Again, very recently, 7 targets, 6 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown in a weather game outdoors in Seattle. Now that you go ahead and you travel to Arizona, hopefully this can be a more competitive matchup in comparison to what this was last time, which was a low-scoring game where both defenses were dominating. If we're going to be in a situation in which we're going to get a back-and-forth shootout, JSN has even more potential for upside considering the Arizona Cardinals matchup he has found success against this season and even going back to 2023. They've gone ahead and they've utilized him in a great fashion. Obviously, this most recent week didn't get himself a lot of opportunity share, only 4 targets, 4 catches for 74. But this week, I expect an expansion on those overall targets. Moving on to our number 21, we have Brian Thomas Jr. Now, we unfortunately did hear, and I was expecting this, and we speculated it in regards to yesterday's live stream, that Trevor Lawrence was potentially going to miss the remainder of the season. They did, in fact, put him on the injured reserve, and his season is over. That does cap the overall potential for upside for Brian Thomas Jr., but hopefully, Mac Jones will continue to look in Brian Thomas Jr.'s direction for the remainder of the season, and especially this week, considering they take on the Titans. The Titans have most recently allowed 73 and 2 touchdowns to McLaurin, 92 and a touchdown to Collins, and 81 yards to Justin Jefferson. Number 1 outside receivers have found themselves a lot of success. BTJ is the next man up this week, even with Mac Jones. Number 22, Jakobi Meyers. Look, the fact of the matter is, in 4 of the last 5 games, regardless of who's played at quarterback, Jakobi Meyers has scored 12 or more fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. He is continuing to dominate every single week. The last 2 games specifically, getting himself a 30% target share. As long as the opportunities continue to go in his direction, taking on the Buccaneers, a matchup that is allowing over 27 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Again, Jakobi Meyers, the only relevant wide receiver within this offense. Again, they've most recently allowed 99 in a touchdown to Thielen, 64 to Nabers, 93 to Jennings, and of course, D-Hop 86 and 2 touchdowns. This secondary has struggled. Jakobi Meyers is going to be able to expose that once again this week. Moving on to our number 23, Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, on Sunday morning, we saw the report that Jonathan Gannon, the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, specifically said that we're going to get Marvin Harrison the ball in this game. And we weren't 100% sure if we could believe it, but now we're going to believe it because anything that comes out of this man's mouth regarding getting opportunities in the direction of Marvin Harrison probably is going to be true because he got 12 targets in that game. And even though he was able to only catch 5 of them, 60 yards and a touchdown, still was a relevant option for fantasy purposes. Now, hopefully we're going to continue that trend going into this week, taking on Seattle, considering they're a top 14 matchup, 27.5 plus points per game to opposing wide receivers. Adams scored last week. Jennings scored the week prior. DeMarcus Robinson and Cooper Kupp dominated against them recently. Again, a lot of wide receivers have found success. So if you give the opportunities in the direction of Marvin Harrison, he will succeed. Last time out against his defense back in week 12, only 6 targets, 3 catches, 47. So we're hoping for double-digit targets going into this week's game. Moving on to our number 24. Speaking of this matchup against Seattle, we have DK Metcalf. Now, as of late, hasn't been able to find the end zone, and anytime he has a deep target opportunity down the field, it's typically a defensive pass interference in which they're preventing him from scoring. But either way, he's still going to be of value taking on the Arizona Cardinals. Like I mentioned earlier with JSN and Marvin Harrison Jr., hopefully this is going to be a more competitive matchup, and it's going to lead to a higher scoring event between these two teams because the Arizona Cardinals are an advantageous matchup. JJ just went for 7 catches, 99. Odunze went for 104. Tyreek Hill went for 72. There is a possibility in which we could still see DK Metcalf find himself the upside of performance. Just hopefully the targets are going to continue to be there in comparison to where it was last time out against the Arizona Cardinals, in which he only had 5 targets for 4 catches and 59 yards. Moving on to our number 25 to close out the D tier, we have Calvin Ridley. The revenge game is upon us. We have seen wide receivers in revenge games and even just running backs thus far this season like Jeudy, DJ Moore, Saquon Barkley, taking on their former teams and dominate. Calvin Ridley is taking on his former team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and hopefully he's going to step up to the task on hand, considering the Jaguars have allowed, 8 catches for 119 to Collins. Amon-Ra St. Brown and J-Mo both went for over 120 receiving yards. And DeVonta Smith, 87 and a touchdown. Calvin Ridley has his experience against the secondary, having lined up against them all of last season. So hopefully going into this week, we'll be able to take advantage of the opportunity with a healthy volume of targets in his direction. Will Levis, we're talking about you, brother. All right, moving on to our number 26, we have Keenan Allen. Over the course of the last couple of weeks, really just getting himself a healthy volume of opportunity. 23 targets in the last 2 games, which is a 27% target share, which has led to 73 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown minimum in the last 2 games. 19.1 and 21.8 fantasy points and a half PPR. Those are ridiculous numbers for Keenan Allen, but now that he's finally healthy. Earlier this season, he was banged up, dealing with a foot injury, and now that he's at a full capacity, he should continue to dominate in a potential negative game script taking on the 49ers this week. Moving on to our number 27, we have Khalil Shakir. The only reason Khalil Shakir sits down here is because he doesn't score touchdowns, and we're not talking about a full PPR. We are purely talking about half PPR, meeting everyone in the middle, whether you do play in a standard league or a full PPR league. The fact of the matter is, over the course of the last 6 games in which we have seen Khalil Shakir play with, Josh Allen, he has got himself a 26% target share. Specifically in these last 6 games, excluding the snow weather game on Sunday, he's been averaging 7.2 receptions per game. So in a full PPR, he's a completely different machine. And he's the number 1 receiving option of the Bills offense, especially with Dalton Kincaid out. It continues to lend even more opportunity in the direction of Khalil Shakir, who's coming off a week in which he had a 41% target share within the offense. Either way, taking on the Rams, it doesn't matter. Wide receivers continue to dominate against them. So I would anticipate in a controlled weather environment, Khalil Shakir to step up and continue to ball out this week. Moving on to our number 28, we have Jaylen Waddle. Look, Jaylen Waddle continuing to stack up more opportunities as we continue. Obviously, still coming off a week in which he was still the number 4 receiving option behind Jonnu Smith, Devon Achane, and Tyreek Hill. But hopefully this week can be one of his breakout performances, taking on a division rival, which he found his most success against back in 2023. Of all the games he had played, taking on the Jets was his best overall games. One of those 2 games did include the absence of Tyreek Hill, but still put up 8 catches for 114, and in the other game, 8 catches for 142 and a touchdown, 15.4 and 24.2 fantasy points. We're hoping for that kind of upside, especially considering Sauce Gardner is dealing with a hamstring injury and could miss this week. We've seen many of wide receivers dominate. Jaylen Waddle is next up. Moving on to our number 29, we have Deebo Samuel. Now, this is continuing the streak of wide receivers that we know are extremely talented, but just aren't given enough opportunity. Jaylen Waddle is one of those guys, and Deebo Samuel is another. Deebo Samuel obviously coming off of the last 3 games of 22, 21, and 20 receiving yards. So if you're like, I'm completely done with Deebo Samuel, he's lost me 3 weeks in a row, I understand it. I don't blame you. I can empathize with the overall situation, but as it stands currently going into the matchup against the Chicago Bears. Again, the Chicago Bears defense has played solid over the course of the season, but where Deebo Samuel could potentially find himself himself in abundance of success is within the rushing category, something that he hasn't been exposed to in quite a while. But considering the absence of both Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey, we may go ahead and potentially see the running back Deebo Samuel re-enter the conversation, with Isaac Guerrero being the RB1 if those opportunities are going in his direction, on top of receiving utilization that could lead to a lot of yards after the catch. Deebo Samuel could in fact find himself a bounce back performance here against the Chicago Bears. Moving on to our number 30, we have DeAndre Hopkins, who's coming off of a week in which he had 9 targets, which is the most targets he has had going back to week 9 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which was the best game of DeAndre Hopkins' career thus far as a tenured Kansas City Chief. Now, this week, he has an opportunity of taking on the 7th best matchup at the position. Chargers defense that is allowing nearly 30 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. They've most recently allowed 9 catches, 86 to London, 4 catches, 95 to Ray-Ray McCloud. Higgins went for 148 and a touchdown. Chase went for 75 and 2 touchdowns. Hopefully, DeAndre Hopkins and this high volume of opportunity continues to be strung in his direction by Patrick Mahomes. Moving on to our number 31, we have Garrett Wilson. Look, Garrett Wilson last week had 10 targets. Fantastic, but the quality of the targets is not there. Aaron Rodgers is overthrowing him, or quite frankly, just throwing it into the ground. At that point, we're really not getting 10 targets. It's more like 7 within the given week, which has been the primary issue. When you do not give a player of this caliber a healthy volume of opportunity, it's purely going to be, does he score a touchdown? If not, we are screwed. Again, going into this week against the Miami Dolphins, they are a solid secondary. I anticipate Davante Adams to continue to be the primary number 1. And in this circumstance, again, a talented player. But if he's not given the opportunity, what more can we expect at number 31? Moving on to our number 32, very similar. We have DeVonta Smith, another one of these options that, again, hasn't been given a healthy volume of opportunity. But luckily, going into this week, he did practice fully today, and Dallas Goedert is dealing with an injury. So that could mean even more target opportunity going into the matchup against the Carolina Panthers. But again, like we know, this is probably going to be a blowout in which the Eagles are taking an early lead. And if in fact DeVonta Smith is not implicated in extending that lead with a receiving touchdown of his own, probably 32 is safe, if not, potentially even dangerous going into this week, considering the other wide receiver options that we could potentially start going into this week. Moving on to our number 33. We have Jameson Williams, who is going to begin the streak of wide receivers that could score a touchdown on any given play and very easily could be started based on the fact that we have 6 teams on bye. So Jameson Williams, who's coming off of a week in which he had 5 catches for 28, had himself a couple rushing attempts here and there. Listen, if he scores a touchdown, he is highly valuable. Again, understand that he has scored touchdowns of 37, 64, 70, 52 yards. It only takes one singular given play as a home run hitting wide receiver to be relevant within the given week. Again, in comparison to some of these other options, for example, number 34, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, I could not fit his entire name, otherwise it would have extended to other players' names. But another wide receiver in this category that could take a singular play to the house is Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who has quite literally scored 1 singular touchdown in 7 of the last 8 games. It's either he scores 10 points or he doesn't. But luckily this week they take on the Jaguars, and it is an advantageous matchup like I talked earlier with Calvin Ridley. We've seen wide receivers like Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, J-Mo all go for over 115 receiving yards against this defense as of late. So hopefully Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is going to find himself success within the upcoming matchup with an ample set of opportunity. Moving on to our number 35, another wide receiver that as of late has scored touchdowns, in fact 3 in the last 5 games, is Jordan Addison. Now has an opportunity of taking on the Falcons, the 4th best matchup at the position, while the Falcons secondary is too busy double covering, triple covering Justin Jefferson on many of their efforts. It may open up even more opportunity for Jordan Addison. Lad McConkey last week, 117. MVS the week prior, 109, 2 touchdowns. Denver's receiving options, 260 and 3 touchdowns. Jordan Addison could be a potential play within the given week. Moving on to our number 36, speaking of Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who has scored many of touchdowns as of late against everyone, has in fact scored 1 receiving touchdown in each of the last 3 games, very similar to a Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, either scores 10 plus fantasy points or he doesn't. Now, going into this week, in the absence of Taysom Hill, there may be even more target opportunity taking on the New York Giants, especially considering this Giants defense as a whole has struggled. When they go ahead and potentially bite to try to stop the run, as they most likely won't be capable of doing so, it may open up even more play action for Derek Carr to take a couple shots down the field. Really, Marquez Valdes-Scantling is going to finish with 2 or 3 receptions by the end of the week. If one of those are a touchdown, fantastic. He's a solid top 36 play. Moving on to our number 37, we have Adam Thielen. The only reason he sits here at 37 is because this is a half PPR ranking. In a full PPR, I'd increase his overall ranking because outside of him scoring a touchdown, we're probably going to be cooked in that scenario. They're taking on the Eagles, which is a very, very solid matchup at the wide receiver position with the potential return of Darius Slay from the concussion protocol, Avonte Maddox, Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell. There are great cornerbacks in this secondary that continue to play well, especially within the nickel position. Therefore, Adam Thielen's going to definitely have his hands full with a lot of cornerbacks that will give him potential troubles. But if in fact this game becomes a blowout, in a negative game script, could see a little bit more opportunity than he normally does. Moving on to our number 38, we have Darnell Mooney. This is purely contingent on whether or not a guy like Kirk Cousins can step up on the task on hand and take on his former team. If Kirk Cousins, who has yet to throw a touchdown in each of the last 3 games, is going to step up, fantastic. It's a top 5 matchup for the wide receiver position. But, considering Darnell Mooney's coming off of a week of 3 catches, 20 yards, and only 6 targets, again, we're not expecting a lot within this offense. Then we move on to Christian Watson, primarily because Romeo Doubs has been already confirmed to be out this week. The Lions are a top 10 wide receiver matchup, so we would assume a couple deep shot opportunities in the direction of Christian Watson, who also is implicated within the red zone. Moving on to our number 40, we have Cedric Tillman. Now, Cedric Tillman is expected to return this week. Earlier today, did not practice. In the event in which he does not play, automatically we are going with Elijah Moore. But in the event in which he is potentially playing, considering defenses are going to be more in tune with stopping Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku, it will open up more opportunities for Cedric Tillman, especially considering how this offense has looked. Most recently on that Monday night game, Jameis Winston had 31 passing attempts by the end of the first half. So if we're going to continue to throw the ball 40, 50 plus times per game, Cedric Tillman still implicated to be a valuable wide receiver within the given week. All right, that's going to cover my top 40 wide receiver rankings for week 14. If you guys appreciate the content, click the like button down below. Of course, thank you very much for watching today. Again, I'll be back later tonight starting at 7 p.m. PST. If you guys have any questions regarding wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, etc., going into week 14, be sure to swing on by. I'm more than happy to help. Outside of that, I'll be back tomorrow with my tight end and quarterback rankings. Until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.